The rain hit the windows softly that night, the kind of rhythmic tapping that could lull someone to sleep, if sleep were possible in a place so full of secrets. Eli Harper, 26, had just begun his volunteer shift at the Hillside Children's Shelter, a small and aging facility tucked far from town, halfway up a wooded hill. It wasn't the kind of place that saw much attention. The building was neat, but sterile. The staff were polite but worn. The walls, Eli felt, remembered more than anyone admitted. Eli wasn't a trained counselor or a seasoned caregiver, just a kind-hearted teacher between jobs, trying to do something meaningful. He had volunteered for night duty because no one else wanted it. The overnight shifts were long, quiet, and uneventful, they said. But that night, something felt different the moment he stepped into the West Wing. That wing was where they kept the sensitive cases, children who had seen too much, heard too much, and said too little. The room he entered held three: a girl named Leila, her younger brother Micah, and their infant sibling, Joe. All three were siblings from the same placement. Leila was 8 but looked older. She had those two still eyes, the kind that stayed open long after bedtime, staring at the ceiling like it held answers. Micah, 6, was curled tightly beneath his blanket, back to the door, and the baby Joe lay swaddled and silent in the crib against the far wall. Eli moved quietly, not wanting to disturb them. He settled into the small chair in the corner, a knob, old, creaking thing that looked like it had held years of quiet, tired watchers. The dim light from the hallway barely spilled into the room. It smelled faintly of lavender and something else, something sour, almost metallic. He told himself it was just old walls and detergent. He watched them for a while. No one moved. There. Breathing was slow and even, like they'd already fallen asleep. Satisfied, Eli leaned back, closed his eyes, and let his thoughts drift. That's when he heard it, a whisper, soft, fragile. If we breathe loud, they get mad. Eli's eyes snapped open. The voice came from Lila. She hadn't moved, hadn't even looked his way, but he was certain those words had left her lips. He sat up slowly. Lila? He said gently, barely above a whisper himself. What did you say? She didn't answer. Her gaze was still on the ceiling. Her expression was blank, but her fingers were curled tightly into the thin bedsheet. Eli didn't push. He had been told not to pressure the kids, especially those like Layla, who had a history of trauma and refusal to speak. But the words she'd said echoed in his mind. If we breathe loud, they get mad. It didn't sound like a game. It didn't sound like fear of monsters under the bed. It sounded like a rule, like something she had learned through repetition and punishment. He looked at the baby. Joe was still, quiet, eyes closed. Then at Micah, who now had his head buried deeper in the pillow, one hand tightly clutched to his chest. No one moved. No one made a sound. Eli leaned forward slightly. Who gets mad, Layla? He whispered. Still nothing. He felt a chill in his spine, not from fear, but from the sudden, unbearable sense that this room held a silence far heavier than he understood. Later that night, when the kids were asleep for real, he pulled out his notebook and jotted it down. Lila whispered, "If we breathe loud, they get mad." Micah stayed silent. Baby Joe didn't cry. Something's not right. In the morning, Eli reported the incident to one of the senior staff members, a woman named Helen. He repeated Leila's exact words. Helen frowned but didn't seem alarmed. A lot of the kids say strange things at night, she said. It's how they cope. Sometimes they make up stories. You have to be careful not to read too much into it. But it didn't sound made up, Eli insisted. It sounded practiced. Helen offered a tired smile. You're new, Eli. The best thing you can do is be a calm presence for them. Let the therapist do the digging. That was the end of the conversation. But it wasn't the end for Eli. He left the office that morning with a growing sense of unease. That whisper hadn't been imagination. It had been a warning, and though he didn't know it yet, that single sentence would unravel everything he thought he knew about Hillside and change his life, and the children's, forever. Eli Harper couldn't shake Lila's words, even hours later, as the morning sun filtered through the dusty windows of the Hillside Children's Shelter. After finishing his overnight shift, he went home, tried to sleep, but found himself replaying that whisper over and over again. If we breathe loud, they get mad. He returned that evening with a new determination. Something in that room had been wrong. He felt it in his bones. Children sometimes said odd things, yes, but not like that. Lila hadn't spoken in metaphors. Her tone wasn't frightened or confused. It had been flat, rehearsed, memorized. That night, he brought a sketch pad with him, thinking he might coax the kids into drawing. Sometimes children showed more in pictures than in words. He also brought small packets of animal crackers, thinking they might warm up to him with something simple and safe. When he entered the West Wing again, the air felt heavy. Lila was already in bed, eyes open. Micah sat cross-legged on the floor, building something with a few worn blocks they were allowed to keep. Jo was asleep in her crib, her small chest rising and falling slowly. Eli knelt beside Micah. "Hey, buddy," he said gently. "That looks like a big building." Micah didn't speak. He simply nodded, not looking up. Eli glanced at Lila. She watched him but didn't say anything. She wasn't frightened, not exactly. But her stillness was unnatural. She was too controlled. For an 8-year-old, Eli pulled out the animal crackers and held them out. "Would you guys like a snack?" Micah's eyes lit up a little, but he looked toward Lila, who gave him a nearly imperceptible shake of her head. He hesitated, then lowered his eyes back to his blocks. Eli gently set the packets down on the small table nearby. "They're here if you want them," he said. After settling in the corner chair again, Eli waited. The shelter required him to log any behavioral patterns, sleep disturbances, or emotional triggers. But he was watching more than that. He was trying to see the invisible rules these kids lived by. An hour passed. Then another. Micah eventually climbed into bed beside Lila, but he didn't sleep. Neither did she. They just lay there, unmoving. Jo whimpered softly once, and both older siblings immediately sat up silent and wide-eyed as if anticipating punishment. Eli instinctively rose from his seat to check on the baby, but Lila's sharp look stopped him. She shook her head slow, deliberate. "Don't." He froze, confused. "Why not?" he asked softly. Lila didn't answer. Instead, she pulled Jo's blanket tighter through the bars of the crib from her bed, comforting the baby herself. The infant calmed within seconds. Eli sat back down, troubled. Why had she stopped him from going near the baby? Did she think he might hurt her? Or was it because someone else had, in the past? Later in the night, Eli noticed something else. Micah's posture. Every time he rolled to his side, he flinched slightly, like he was guarding a part of his body. When the boy reached for his blanket, Eli noticed faint, yellowing bruises around his wrist. Nothing fresh, but unmistakably there. He knew the shelter had strict intake procedures. The children were supposed to be seen by medical staff upon arrival. Any signs of abuse should have been documented. So why had no one followed up? Were they assuming everything was part of the kid's trauma history? Eli scribbled a note in his logbook. Micah bruises visible left wrist. Flinches when turning. No signs of fresh injury. Logged for review. He debated going to Helen again, but her tired dismissal from the morning before still echoed in his head. She didn't want trouble. No one there did. The shelter was understaffed, overworked, and on thin ice with the state. Allegations meant inspections, and inspections meant funding risked. As the room darkened further and the hum of the hallway lights faded, Eli leaned forward. "Lila," he whispered, "can I ask you something?" She didn't answer, but he pressed gently. "Why did you say that last night? About breathing loud?" Lila turned her head slightly toward him, just enough for her eyes to meet his in the dark. "They don't like sounds," she whispered. "If we make sounds, they get angry. They say, it's our fault." Eli's heart twisted. "Who says that?" he asked, keeping his voice low. She didn't answer. Instead, she rolled onto her side and pulled the blanket up to her chin. Micah shifted closer to her. He whispered something Eli couldn't hear. Whatever it was, she responded by wrapping her arms around him, as if shielding him from something invisible but very real. Eli sat back again, shaken. He had come here to offer comfort, but it was becoming painfully clear that this wasn't just a matter of emotional healing. Something had happened or was still happening, and somehow the children believed silence was their only protection. That whisper, now spoken twice, wasn't just a memory. It was still a rule, one they hadn't stopped living by. The following day, Eli Harper walked into Hillside Shelter with a weight on his shoulders that hadn't been there the week before. Something about those children, Lila, Micah, and baby Joe, was unraveling inside him. Not just as a volunteer or a concerned adult, but as someone who was beginning to feel deeply responsible for what they couldn't say out loud. He arrived early, hours before his overnight shift, under the guise of helping with dinner preparations. In reality, he wanted more time with the children while the lights were still on, while they were still surrounded by others. He needed to see what their behavior looked like in the daylight, not just in the silence of midnight. During group playtime, the kids were brought into the common area where puzzles, books, and coloring pages sat scattered across long tables. Most children milled around, giggling and arguing over crayons, but Lila and Micah stayed pressed against the wall. Joe was asleep in a nearby bassinet. As always, Lila hovered near her, never more than an arm's reach away. Eli approached them with a soft smile. "You guys want to help me with this puzzle?" he asked, tapping the edge of the table. Micah's eyes darted toward his sister again, always asking permission. Lila gave him a small nod. They joined Eli reluctantly. He slid the box toward them, letting them choose the pieces first. Micah hesitated before reaching for one, and that's when Eli saw it. Bruises. They weren't fresh, but they were clear. Yellowing patches ringed his thin wrists, and just under the edge of his short sleeves, Eli caught a glimpse of more down his left arm. Small, finger-shaped, deliberate. Micah noticed Eli looking and instinctively pulled his sleeve down. Then, quickly, he looked to Lila. Her face hardened. "I'm sorry," Micah muttered, barely audible. Eli's voice was gentle. "You didn't do anything wrong." Neither of them responded. Later that evening, once the other volunteers had thinned out, Eli brought it up with one of the staff nurses, Dana. She was kind but always rushed like everyone else in that building. "I noticed bruises on Micah," Eli began carefully, "on his arms. Wrist area. Not new, but they're there." Dana sighed. "Yeah, those were noted during intake. Probably from the home they were pulled from." "That's what I figured," Eli said. "But have we checked him since?" She shook her head. "Not officially. Unless there's a new injury or a report, we don't re-examine. We're already past capacity." "Right," Eli said, but something about the answer didn't sit well. That night, when Eli took over the night shift again, he walked into the children's room with something new in hand. 3 blank sheets of paper and a box of colored pencils. He'd been thinking about the silence Lila wrapped herself in, the fear that shadowed her every move. Maybe drawing could unlock what her words couldn't. "I thought we could make some art tonight," he said lightly. Something happy. Anything you like. Lila didn't respond, but Micah took a paper and sat at the small desk by the window. He picked up a red pencil and began scribbling. Eli handed Lila her page and placed the third next to Joe's crib, just in case. He left them to it and sat nearby, letting the quiet settle. After 15 minutes, Micah quietly brought his drawing to Eli. It was rough, childlike, but unmistakable. 3 stick figures, 2 children, and a baby behind what looked like bars. A larger figure stood outside the bars, colored in dark gray with angry red scribbles where the face should be. In the corner, a stick figure stood holding something, a key maybe? Eli's throat tightened. Micah, who is this? He asked. Softly, pointing to the gray figure. Micah didn't answer. His eyes stayed on the floor. Eli gently pressed again. And what's this? He pointed to the person with the key. Micah looked up then. That's you, he whispered. I think. Before Eli could respond, Lila walked over and silently handed him her drawing. It was simpler. A picture of a closet with something inside it. A pair of eyes, wide and scared. And next to it, a big red X. Eli stared at both drawings for a long time, his heart pounding. These weren't imagination games. They were memories, and worst of all, no one else was paying attention. He returned to his chair, holding both papers like fragile truths. That night, as he dimmed the lights and settled in for what he knew would be another long, heavy shift, he promised himself something. If no one else would fight for these kids, he would. But he still didn't know how deep the darkness in Hillside really went. It had been nearly a week since Eli Harper first heard Lila's chilling whisper in the dark, and every passing night brought new shadows into the halls of Hillside. He was no longer simply concerned, he was sure now. Something was wrong, and the children knew it. But no one else seemed to listen. That evening, before his overnight shift began, Eli walked the halls with purpose. He passed the staff break room, the therapy offices, and turned into the West Wing, now deeply familiar to him. Lila and Micah were already in bed, lying stiff under their thin blankets. Baby Joe cooed softly in her crib. Nothing unusual, at least not on the surface, but tonight, Eli planned to do more than just sit and observe. During his earlier shift, he'd walked past a door he hadn't paid much attention to before. It was at the far end of the hallway past the children's rooms, marked plainly as storage. But something about it tugged at his gut, maybe the heavy padlock, maybe the unnatural silence surrounding it. Maybe it was that both Lila and Micah always tensed when he walked in that direction. He waited until the children were asleep, at least, pretending to be before slipping quietly out of their room and walking to that door. The hallway was dim and cold. Most of the building powered down at night to save on electricity. The motion sensors kept the lights off unless someone moved. So Eli walked slowly, keeping his steps light. When he reached the storage door, he examined it closely. The padlock wasn't new, but it was sturdy. Too sturdy. He tugged at the handle. Gently. It didn't budge. Then something strange. A noise behind him. Not loud. Just a soft shuffle, like feet dragging briefly across the tiled floor. Eli spun around. Nothing. The hallway was empty, but the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. He returned to the children's room feeling unsettled as he stepped. Inside, he found Lila sitting upright, watching him. "Where did you go?" she asked, her voice flat. Eli was taken aback. It was the first time she'd initiated a question. "I was just checking something down the hall," he replied. "Shouldn't go there," she said quietly. "Why not?" Her hands gripped the blanket. "That's where they put Micah." Eli's heart pounded. "Who put him there?" She looked away. "The one with the keys. He says that room is for bad kids." Eli lowered himself to her eye level. "How long ago did that happen?" Lila didn't answer. But Micah, eyes open now, spoke from his bed. "It's dark in there," he whispered. "They take your socks and your blanket. You get cold." Eli felt his throat tighten. "Did someone hurt you?" "In that room?" Micah nodded once, then pulled the sheet over his head. Eli couldn't sleep that night. He paced quietly, stopping only to check on the children, who eventually drifted into fitful rest. The next morning, after handing off his logbook and notes, he lingered in the office hallway. He found the shelter director, a woman named Teresa. Glenn, and asked if he could speak privately. She raised an eyebrow but nodded. Her office smelled like stale coffee and hand sanitizer. Stacks of paperwork sat untouched on every surface. "I need to ask about the locked room in the West Wing," Eli said carefully. Teresa didn't flinch. "The storage room?" "Yes, the one with the padlock." Lila said, "I know what Lila says," she interrupted, tone suddenly defensive. "She's imaginative, and she's scared. We've been working with her for months. That room is not used for anything other than surplus supplies." Eli didn't believe that. Why would a child say she or her brother was locked in there? Teresa folded her arms. "Eli, you've been here what? A week? I appreciate your concern, but you're stepping into something you don't understand. We're barely funded, constantly scrutinized, and overrun with high-needs placements. The last thing we need is exaggerated stories muddying our records." "But what if they're not exaggerating?" she sighed. "Then the system has already failed them long before they arrived here." That was it. She dismissed him. Eli walked out, fuming quietly. He knew what he'd heard, what he'd seen. Micah's bruises, the terrified silence. The way they reacted to that hallway. Back in the children's room that night, he checked under Micah's mattress and found something hidden. A small soiled blanket, rolled tightly and stuffed behind the wooden slats. It smelled damp, like it had been used to cry into. Micah must have taken it back after the incident, hiding it like a token of survival. Eli looked at the children sleeping, or pretending to. He sat down, and this time, he didn't write in the shelter's logbook. He started a new notebook, his own. This wasn't just about whispers anymore. It was about evidence. Because if no one would open that locked door, he would find a way to break it down himself. A storm rolled in on Eli Harper's fifth night in the West Wing of Hillside Shelter. Thick clouds had been threatening the sky all day, but as the sun dipped behind the trees, the first peals of thunder shook the windows. The power flickered. Once, then twice before cutting out completely. The backup generator kicked in, but it only supplied enough energy to keep the emergency lights glowing faint red in the halls. In the children's rooms, it was near total darkness. That night, Hillside fell under an eerie quiet. Too quiet. Eli had never seen Lila or Micah panic before, not outwardly. They were the kind of children who froze when frightened, who learned long ago that crying brought punishment. But the moment the lights went out and thunder cracked loud above them, something in both of them broke. Micah clutched the edge of his mattress, eyes wide and wild. Lila pressed her body against the crib, shielding baby Joe like a human shield. Joe whimpered softly, beginning to cry. Joe," Lila whispered, her voice trembling for the first time since Eli had met her. "Please, not now." Eli rushed to calm them. He lit a small emergency lantern and set it in the center of the room. The dim glow was enough to reveal how pale the children had become. Lila's hands were shaking. "It's just the storm," Eli said gently. "The power's out, but everything's okay. I'm here." Lila looked up at him, and for the first time, he saw raw panic in her eyes. "No," she said, "it's not okay." Micah crawled toward her, tears streaming silently down his cheeks. Lila pulled him close and wrapped both arms around him. Rocking slowly, Eli knelt beside them. "Can you tell me what's scaring you?" Her lips parted. Her voice was fragile, like a thread about to snap. They come when it's dark. Eli stiffened. Who comes? She didn't answer right away. Her gaze darted toward the door. The man with the keys. He says the storm makes the bad ones scream. That it's our fault when they do. He says we have to be punished to keep them quiet. Eli felt cold seep into his bones. This wasn't metaphor. This wasn't trauma-induced confusion. This was routine. Layla, he said softly, has someone been coming into this room? She nodded. Micah sobbed into her shirt. He comes when it rains, she whispered. He came before. Last time he took Joe. Eli turned to the baby Joe. Was still crying softly, too young to understand, but clearly sensing the fear around her. What do you mean? He took Joe? He put her in the closet, said she made too much noise. Said we could have her back when we learn to be quiet. Eli's hands curled into fists. Every instinct in his body screamed for action, but he had no proof, and he knew the shelter would shut him down again if he stormed into the office ranting without a doubt. So he did the one thing he could. He stayed. He pulled Joe from the crib and held her close, cradling her against his chest until her crying eased. He wrapped a blanket around her and sat on the floor next to the other two children. He stayed with them all night, the three of them curled into him, finally resting under his quiet protection. The storm raged for hours, but no one came through the door. Whether it was Eli's presence or just chance, the man with the keys did not appear. Still, Lila remained tense. She didn't sleep. Even as dawn crept in through the cracked windows, she sat with her eyes wide open, watching the door. I believe. You, Eli whispered to her before the shift ended. And I'm going to make sure it never happens again. For the first time, Lila didn't look away. Her voice, when she spoke, was no louder than a breath. They said no one would believe. Us, Eli gave a gentle nod. Well, I do. And in that moment, a crack formed in the wall of silence she'd built around herself. That morning, Eli didn't report the night to Helen or Dana or Teresa. He didn't log it in the shelter's official book either. Instead, he ordered a small, hidden camera and a motion sensor from his personal account. Express shipping. He would no longer ask for permission. He would bring the truth into the light himself. Eli Harper's days at Hillside Shelter were no longer just about volunteer hours. They had become a mission, quiet and urgent. Every moment he spent near Lila, Micah, and Joe confirmed what his gut had screamed since the first whisper. They were not safe, and someone inside that shelter was responsible. But proving it was another matter entirely. He'd already been dismissed by the director, ignored by the staff nurse, and warned not to overstep his role as a volunteer. The weight of bureaucracy was heavy and unforgiving. Yet Eli had learned something in the past week. Silence is the abuser's shield. And these children had been silenced too long. So he started his own trail. After the stormy night when Lila finally spoke openly when she told him about Joe being locked away for crying, Eli knew there was no turning back. The next morning he began digging. From a quiet corner of the local library, he researched Hillside's history. At first, there was nothing alarming, some underfunding, some changes in leadership. But then he found an article from a year prior. A staff member had died in a car accident on a snowy road. Her name was Rebecca Shaw, and she'd worked as a night shift coordinator at Hillside. Buried in the article's comments section was a post from someone claiming to be Rebecca's sister. It mentioned that Rebecca had been unsettled in the weeks before her death, writing about strange things happening in the shelter and how she felt trapped between protecting the children and protecting the job. Eli didn't hesitate. He found the sister's name through social media, Maggie Shaw, and sent a polite but urgent message explaining that he worked with children at Hillside and believed Rebecca might have been trying to expose something. Before her death. To his surprise, Maggie responded the same day. She didn't hesitate to talk. They spoke over the phone that evening. Maggie's voice trembled as she explained how Rebecca had become increasingly distraught before her accident. She told me kids would go missing from their rooms for hours, Maggie said, that they were punished in places no one else had access to. She said one night she found a little boy in a janitor's closet, curled up and shivering. Eli's stomach turned. Did she report it? She tried. But the director back then, the same one you probably have now, told her she was overreacting. That trauma made children behave strangely and imagine things. That was the exact phrase Helen had used with Eli. Maggie continued. Rebecca started keeping a journal. Said she'd document everything and go to the state if she had to. But then, out of nowhere, she was gone. Eli asked if Maggie still had the journal. There was a pause. Yes, she said. I never knew what to do with it. By the end of the call, Maggie agreed to scan and send the pages over. That night, as the shelter grew quiet again, Eli sat in the West Wing with his phone in hand and Joe asleep in his arms. Lila and Micah lay nearby, both still wary of the hallway outside. A ding alerted him to a new email. Attached were over 40 pages of handwritten notes. He scrolled through shaky handwriting, some entries smudged with what looked like coffee stains or tears. They were dated across several months' notes from Rebecca's time at Hillside. Excerpt, March 5th. Found bruises on both arms of the girl in room 3. She said, I was too loud again. No one investigated. Director told me to. Drop it. Excerpt, March 28th. Something wrong with the night custodian. Kids flinch when he's near. Found him near the West Wing after lights out. Said he was checking on noise. Excerpt, April 15th. Lila, the girl doesn't speak much, but when she does, it's chilling. Tonight, she said, he puts us in the room if we cry. Eli stopped reading. It was the same sentence Lila had whispered to him only 2 nights ago. Rebecca had known. She'd tried to help. And maybe, just maybe, her accident hadn't been so accidental. Eli copied the entries into his own notes, backing them up in multiple places. He printed the most relevant ones and tucked them in his bag. They were proof not just of the abuse, but of a system that had ignored it once already. And tomorrow, he would begin preparing for something else. The camera he'd ordered had arrived. He'd already tested it small, high-resolution, motion-activated. He would place it in the West Wing hallway, angled just right to catch anyone entering or exiting. Lila and Micah's room. If someone came again on a stormy night or in any dark moment, they would not slip away unseen. Eli knew the risks. If he was caught, he could be banned from the shelter. But the risk of doing nothing was greater. The children had lost one. Protector already in Rebecca Shaw. He wouldn't let them lose another. The next night was quiet, too quiet. No storms, no flickering lights, not even the creak of old pipes. The silence stretched through the West Wing like a taut wire. Eli Harper sat in the familiar chair near the corner of the children's room. But this time, he wasn't just waiting. He was watching. Earlier that day, when no one was looking, he had installed the small, motion-triggered camera just above the hallway doorframe. It faced the corridor leading to the locked storage room. If someone came down that hallway, even in the dark, the lens would catch them. He'd angled it carefully, enough to avoid suspicion from staff, but wide enough to capture anyone slipping into the children's room or near the forbidden store. It was no longer just about suspicion. It was about evidence. Lila and Micah were already in bed, as always lying still. But tonight they weren't pretending to sleep out of habit. They were waiting too. Micah clutched his worn blanket tightly in his fist. Lila kept glancing toward the door, her gaze sharp. It wasn't fear anymore, it was readiness. Like a child waiting to see if a monster returned. Eli had spent the entire day reading more of Rebecca Shaw's journal. In nearly every entry, she described things Eli now saw for himself: punishments masked as discipline, staff dismissing trauma signs, and most troubling of all, a staff member who wandered the halls after dark, a man who didn't belong in a place with children. Eli didn't have a name, but he had a job title: night custodian, and tonight he would get a face. Around 2:17 a.m., it happened. The hallway sensor light clicked on. Eli held his breath. Footsteps, slow and measured, approached the door. The sound of keys rattled softly. Lila flinched under the blanket. Eli stood silently and moved to the door, standing behind it in the shadows, heart pounding in his throat. He didn't open it, didn't make a sound, just listened. The footsteps paused outside the children's room. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then the faint sound of fingers grazing the doorknob. And then footsteps again. Moving slowly toward the end of the hall, Eli opened the door just a crack and peeked out. A tall figure in a faded blue janitor's uniform stood near the locked storage room. He was facing the door, fumbling with something, a key ring. But before unlocking it, he glanced back toward Eli's direction. For 1 second, their eyes met. Even in the dim light, Eli could see it. The man's face froze, not in surprise, but in recognition, as if he knew Eli had been waiting for him. Then the custodian turned quickly and disappeared through the storage room door. Eli stood still, pulse thundering in his ears. He returned to the room, where Lila was now sitting up in bed. "You saw him," she said quietly. Eli nodded. "Will you tell them now?" "Yes," Eli whispered, "and this time they'll have to listen." By morning, he retrieved the camera and reviewed the footage. It was all there. The man in the hallway, his pause outside the children's door, his movement toward the storage room, the key in his hand. Eli downloaded the video, backed it up on 2 devices, and copied still images of the custodian's face. Then he printed screenshots and packaged them with select pages from Rebecca Shaw's journal. At noon, instead of going home to sleep, Eli walked into the office of Teresa Glynn, the shelter director, holding the manila folder in his hand. "Need to show you something," he said firmly. Teresa barely glanced up. "If this is about Lila and Micah again, we've already—" "It's not a feeling this time," Eli said. "It's proof." He opened the folder and placed the photos on her desk. Teresa's expression shifted from annoyance to something like disbelief. She picked up the first photo, then the second. When she reached the journal page, her hand froze. Eli leaned in. "That man has access to the West Wing during the night. He carries keys. Lila and Micah say he's the one who locks them in that storage room when they cry. Rebecca Shaw tried to report it a year ago. She died before she could follow through." Teresa looked up, her voice small now. "You've been filming the halls?" "Yes," Eli said, "because no one here listened." She sat back, suddenly pale. "I have copies of everything," Eli continued. "And if CPS isn't here by this time tomorrow, I'll deliver it all to the media myself." For a long moment, Teresa didn't respond. Then, without a word, she picked up her phone. Eli walked out of the office without looking back. That night, he returned to the West Wing and sat with Lila and Micah again. "You were right," he told them. "He won't hurt you anymore." Micah didn't speak, but he slid closer to Eli. And for the first time, Lila smiled just a little. The day after, Eli Harper handed over the footage and Rebecca Shaw's journal pages to the director of Hillside Shelter. Was a tense one. There was no immediate fallout, no sirens, no staff confrontations, but the energy inside the building had shifted. Everyone seemed quieter, watchful, like the walls themselves knew something was about to break. That evening, Eli wasn't sure. if he would even be allowed to return for his usual overnight shift. But when he arrived, the front desk clerk simply handed him his volunteer badge without a word. No one stopped him. No one thanked him either. Inside the West Wing, the children were already in bed. Layla's eyes were open in the dark, scanning the hallway. Micah curled closer to her when Eli walked in, and Joe stirred softly in her crib. He sat down beside them, heart still pounding from the uncertainty of what came next. Earlier that afternoon, the shelter director, Teresa Glynn, had promised to handle it internally and report everything to Child Protective Services first thing in the morning. But Eli didn't trust her not anymore. He'd seen how quickly concern had been dismissed. He had heard the same tired phrases Rebecca Shaw once heard. Traumatized children imagine things. You're reading into it. We'll look into it. He needed to be sure that someone outside of Hillside had the evidence. So before going on shift, LA had made an extra copy of the video footage and forwarded it along with the journal pages to a trusted friend, a local teacher, who volunteered part-time for a child advocacy center. If things were buried again, that footage wouldn't be. The video was clear and damning. It showed a man in a faded blue janitor's uniform walking the hallway of the West Wing just after 2 a.m. He stopped outside the children's room, rested, his hand on the door handle, and lingered there for nearly a full minute. Then he looked around, pulled out a key ring, and walked toward the locked storage room. The camera caught him unlocking the door and slipping inside, then closing it quietly. Behind him, the footage also showed what it didn't. There was no assigned reason for him to be there. No emergency. No cleaning supplies. Just a dark hallway and a man moving like a predator in the night. In the background of the footage, soft noises echoed, barely audible, but chilling once you knew what to listen for. A small voice murmuring. A baby fussing. A child whispering, "Please don't." Eli couldn't bear to watch it more than once. That night, at around 11 p.m., Teresa appeared in the West Wing. Her heels clicked sharply on the tile, and Eli instinctively moved in front of the children's door. "I'm not here for them," she said flatly. "I just need a word." He followed her down the hall to the staff lounge. Inside, a man in a gray suit sat waiting, someone Eli didn't recognize. "This is Agent Rahman with CPS," Teresa said. "He received the footage this morning and started the investigation immediately." Eli blinked in surprise. "You actually turned it in?" "I had no choice," she said, almost bitterly. "It's real, isn't it?" Agent Rahman gave a small nod. "We've seen enough. We've already pulled the facility logs and confirmed the custodian's shift schedule. He was never supposed to have keys to that section, and his employment file is missing the required background check." Eli's hands clenched. "What happens now?" Rahman was calm but firm. "We'll be coming in quietly tomorrow to remove the children from this wing, all of them. Once they're safe, we'll begin the formal review and coordinate with local authorities." Eli let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "What about Lila, Micah, and Joe?" "They'll be placed together in a trauma-informed foster home," Rahman said. "You did the right thing, Mr. Harper. If not for you, this would have stayed hidden." Eli returned to the room in silence. When he opened the door, Lila was still awake. "Is he gone?" she whispered. "Almost," Eli said gently. "And you won't ever have to see him again." She nodded slowly, her face unreadable. Micah stirred beside her. "Will we leave this place?" "Yes," Eli said. "Tomorrow." "Somewhere safe?" And for the first time, Micah smiled. The silence in the room that night wasn't fear anymore. It was relief. It was the sound of walls cracking. It was the quiet before freedom. The next morning dawned with an odd stillness, a kind of hush that seemed too intentional, like the building itself knew something was about to change. Eli Harper stood outside the West Wing early, dressed in the same gray hoodie and jeans he wore on every overnight shift. But today, he wasn't a volunteer watching from the shadows. He was the only adult those children trusted. And today, they were leaving Dot at exactly 9 a.m. Two unmarked black cars rolled up to the front entrance of Hillside Children's Shelter. The doors opened and several individuals stepped out too in Child Protective Services windbreakers. One woman with a large case clipboard, and another man in a dress shirt with an official state badge clipped to his belt. Inside, staff started to shift nervously. No alarm was raised, no announcements made, but the building's rhythm fractured. The receptionist's voice grew tight. A few staff members stopped speaking when Eli passed them in the hallway. The storm had arrived, and they all knew who brought it. CPS Agent Ramon led the small team down the hallway, nodding once when he saw Eli. He didn't say a word, but his presence alone was louder than any explanation. They made their way to the West Wing. Lila, Micah, and baby Joe were already awake. Lila sat on her bed with her arms wrapped tightly around Micah. Joe babbled softly from her crib, unaware of the gravity in the air. Eli knelt beside them. "Remember what I told you?" he asked. Micah nodded slowly. Layla's eyes stayed locked on the door. "It's time," Eli said gently. "You're leaving this place. Are you coming?" Micah asked. Eli hesitated. "I can't come with you," he said. "But I'll know where you go. And I promise they'll never put you somewhere like this again." A woman from CPS entered the room, tall, with kind eyes and a clipboard in hand. She introduced herself as Marissa. She smiled softly and knelt down at their level. "Hi, Lila." "Hi, Micah. I'm here to help take you and Joe to a new home. Together. No more locked rooms. No more scary nights. Just quiet, warm beds and kind people." Lila's fingers tightened on Micah's shirt. She didn't speak, but after a moment, she stood up straight and brave. "Okay," she whispered. Eli packed a small bag with the children's few belongings. Micah's old blanket, Joe's teething ring, and a drawing Lila had once handed him, 3 stick figures holding hands under a sun. That paper meant more now than anything else in the building. When they left the room, the hallway was silent. Staff peeked from behind doors but said nothing. No one stopped the procession of children walking away from the shadows. No one had the right anymore. At the front entrance, Teresa Glynn stood behind the reception desk. Her expression was tight, unreadable. As the CPS agents walked the children past her, she gave a shallow nod, almost like she wanted to pretend she had been part of the solution. But Eli knew better. She hadn't protected them. She had protected herself. Once the cars pulled away, Eli stood outside for a long time. The building loomed behind him, tired and grim. For years it had hidden abuse behind paperwork and funding cuts, routine and silence, but not anymore. Later that afternoon, 2 police officers arrived and quietly escorted the night custodian off the premises. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. As he was led away, Eli saw something strange in his expression. Not fear, not anger. Just emptiness. As if he'd never believed he would be stopped. That evening, Eli received a message from Marissa, the CPS agent. The kids are placed with a trauma-trained foster family in a quiet neighborhood. They're safe. They asked about you. Lila wanted you to have this. Attached was a photo of a new drawing. 4 stick figures now, not 3. One taller than the rest, drawn with curly, black hair. All of them smiling. Eli stared at the image until his eyes blurred. That night, for the first time in over a week, he did not return to Hillside. There were no whispers in the dark. No frightened eyes. Beneath thin blankets, the room was empty, but for the first time, that felt like victory, because Layla, Micah, and Joe were gone. And this time, they weren't running. They were finally free. 2 weeks had passed since the children were removed from Hillside Shelter. The building still stood, but something had changed. The whispers in its walls had been replaced by investigation reports, closed doors, and the quiet buzz of government scrutiny. CPS officials came and went daily. Interviews were conducted. Files were pulled. Locks were changed, but Eli Harper hadn't gone back. He spent those 2 weeks in a strange limbo, physically distant from the shelter, but emotionally closer to those 3 children than he'd ever been. Every day he checked in with Marissa from CPS. Every day he asked about Lila, Micah, and Joe. He learned that Joe had started sleeping through the night, that Micah was drawing again this time, smiling suns and flowers, not cages and keys, and that Lila still hadn't spoken much, but she was different now. Watchful, not scared. Alert, not frozen. Then, on a quiet Saturday morning, Eli's phone buzzed. It was Marissa. "They want to see you, especially Lila. Would you come visit?" He didn't hesitate. The new home was in a sleepy cul-de-sac surrounded by pine trees and wind chimes. It smelled of fresh bread and lavender when Eli stepped through the door. The foster mother, Ms. Amanda, welcomed him kindly, then led him into a sunny living room where 3 small children were playing on a rug. Joe was crawling now, giggling. Micah was building towers out of foam blocks. And Lila sat on the couch holding a book, legs tucked beneath her. She looked up the moment he walked in. Her face didn't light up. She didn't jump into his arms, but her shoulders softened. Her chin lifted. And most importantly, her eyes filled with warmth, not warning. Micah ran to him first. "You came," he beamed. "We have snacks here, real ones." Eli laughed and knelt to hug him. Joe babbled and clapped. Then, slowly, Lila set her book down and walked toward him. She stopped a few feet away. They looked at each other for a long, quiet moment. Then she said, softly, "You breathed loud." Eli blinked, confused. "What?" She repeated it, this time with the ghost of a smile. "You breathed loud, and you weren't afraid." Suddenly, he understood. For so long, the rule in their world had been don't breathe loud, don't be noticed, don't disturb the silence, don't survive loudly, but he had on purpose. "I had to," he said gently, "so someone would finally hear." "You." She nodded slowly. "I didn't think anyone ever would." "I know," he said, "but I did." Lila reached into the pocket of her cardigan and handed him something, a folded piece of paper. He opened it. It was a drawing. 4 people again, Lila. Micah, Joe, and him. But now they weren't behind bars or hiding in dark corners. They were standing in a field under a blue sky. In the corner, Leela had drawn a house with big windows. No locks, no X single quotes S. Above them, she had written, "If we speak, he listens." Eli couldn't hold back the tears. She was healing. They all were. Later, before he left, Amanda pulled him aside. "I've worked with a lot of children," she said, "but I've never seen a girl as brave as Lila. Whatever you did for them, it opened something." "She trusts you," Eli nodded. "I just gave them what no one else would," Amanda smiled. "A voice?" Eli shook his head. "A witness." That night, Eli returned home and opened a blank notebook. On the first page, he wrote, "Rebecca Shaw. Tried. I finished what she started, but the work isn't over." He'd seen how silence protected abusers. He'd seen how institutions turned away from uncomfortable truths, and now he had no intention of ever going back to that silence. Weeks later, Hillside Shelter was shut down by state order. Several staff members were charged. The night custodian faced criminal charges for endangerment, unlawful restraint, and abuse. An official report acknowledged that children had been locked in the storage room repeatedly and punished for crying. talking or simply being children. But by then, Lila, Micah, and Joe were safe, and Eli was already working with a child advocacy group, helping other shelters improve training, transparency, and care. Sometimes, he still heard Lila's voice in his dreams. If we breathe loud, they get mad. Only now, the ending was different, because this time, she whispered not out of fear, but to remind him why he listened in the first place. And every morning, he woke up with a new purpose: to be the one who listens when the world tries to silence a child.